It was just a few weeks ago that I was on the shores of Lake Ida at Pilgrim Point Camp in Alexandria with our Confirmation 8 students as well as middle school students from around the state of Minnesota. And the focus of the retreat that we went to was called Extravagant Welcome, learning how to welcome people from all different backgrounds, from all different traditions, from all different countries into the body of Christ Church. And Brian Sergio, who some of you may know, he's a UCC musician and songwriter. He's also a pastor. He was the keynote speaker or presenter for the weekend, and he led at least 3 or 4 different workshop periods with the entire group. And one of those sessions on Saturday morning, he had the whole group break into our family groups, which were 1 or 2 other churches and their youth and adults got together as sort of a small group, and we had discussion time together. And he presented us with a scenario about Patty and Jose. And Patty has been a part of this school for a long time. She has a great network of friends. A lot of people like her. And Jose is the new kid in school. He's just come over. He's trying to meet new people, and the people that he's met really like him, but he's still kind of feeling like an outsider. Now, Patty is one of those people who just cannot seem to find anything she likes about Jose. Finds kind of every moment that she can to talk about Jose. Patty, I hope you're not feeling like I'm calling you out on this. It's not you, by the way. And Jose is sort of, getting the point. He's getting the point that Patty just doesn't like her. And at this point, it's kind of been between them. But Jose comes in one day into the cafeteria, and he's looking for a place to sit down. I think we've all had this experience before. You're kind of gazing over all the tables, thinking, where can I sit? Who's gonna invite me to sit down? And he sees a bunch of the people that he's really started to get to know and to like, but they're sitting with Patty. But he decides he's going to take a chance, and so he walks up to the table with tray in hand, probably one of the most vulnerable situations you'll ever be in. And Patty just starts yelling at him, saying, you know what, you can't sit here. Nobody likes you. You got to go and sit at that table over there. Probably said a lot of other things, but that's the gist of it. And everybody else at the table, as you would probably think, pretty shocked. Don't know what to do, really. And Jose kind of walks away, head down, feeling very sad, maybe even a little bit ashamed of even trying to come over to that table, and goes and sits down at a table by himself. And after Brian was done describing this scenario, he sent us off into our family groups, and he says, okay, what would you have done if you were one of Patty's friends? If you're sitting around that table hearing what Patty just said to Jose, what would you have done? And then he gave us about 15 minutes to discuss that. And I was very, very impressed, even with just in the family group that I was a part of, just hearing some of the discussion of what the kids would have done. Some would have confronted Patty right there and told her they didn't think that was right and that she didn't speak for everybody and that they would have gone over and sat with Jose. Others said they weren't quite sure, they wouldn't know maybe what they could have done in that immediate situation, but maybe later on would have talked to Patty and Jose each individually, trying to figure out from Patty why she doesn't like Jose so much, and talk to Jose and try and let him know that this was not everybody that felt this way, but that there's something that needed to be patched up in this relationship. There were so many good ideas about how they could welcome Jose in. But the biggest thing that stood out to me in all of those discussions, because afterwards we not only heard from our own group, but we got to hear from each of the other 7 groups that were there and what they were thinking. And in almost every occasion, they would have done something. They would have acted in some way and not stayed silent. How many of us, though, in similar situations, have found ourselves not acting, maybe not taking that next step to try and heal a relationship that's broken, or to kind of sit in that uncomfortableness until we feel it's sort of past and we can move on? Those young middle school students were all saying, you know what, we have the courage to act. We see an injustice here, but we don't just care about Jose's feelings, we care about Patty's feelings too. We want some harmony and some peace within the group. They were trying to create a whole, or what the Jews call shalom. And Esther is a story of trying to create shalom, to try to create wholeness in a community that is being torn apart by Haman. Haman has taken his own sort of pride and put that before everything else. Haman has declared that if you will not bow down to me, and he's not even the king, but if you don't bow down to me, sort of the second in command, then I'm going to create all sorts of problems for you. And this is a very troubling story when we really read the scriptural text. Because Haman does not really just want to send the Jews away. He doesn't want to just banish them from the Persian Empire or the Persian kingdom. He wants to eliminate them. He wants to have them executed. He wants to have them wiped off the face of the earth because of his own selfish reasons. And Haman is an expert manipulator. He has the ear of the king. He knows how to twist and turn things to get his way, and he gets this sort of carte blanche opportunity to do exactly what he wants to do. And he gets the king to put his mark and his seal upon this order to eliminate the Jewish people in the Persian kingdom. So these are desperate, desperate times. It's like getting and receiving a death sentence when these notices go up on the wall that say, on this particular day, they're coming for you. Can you imagine? Walking by those posters every single day, knowing that your time grows shorter and shorter by the moment. This is the desperate and dire situation that we find Esther in. And Mordecai has come to her and told her, you are the only one that can make a difference. You are the only one that can change this. How many of us watch movies, especially these big blockbuster superhero action movies, where it kind of comes down to, the only person that can save the world is Superman or the Flash or the Avengers or whoever it might be, right? But here is a real life situation where Esther is being told, if you don't step up and be that superhero, if you don't step into that position and play that role, tragedy will ensue for all of our people. That's pretty heavy stuff to lay on a very young girl. Now, King Xerxes, or King Ahasuerus, he has this great and deep and abiding love for Esther, and he will do anything for her, and Mordecai knows this. And so Mordecai says, if you just go to him and tell him what's going on, things will change. He will reverse this order, we will be saved. But Esther has other things to worry about. Because one of the other rules set in place by the king that is set in stone, that cannot be broken, is that you may not have an audience before the king unless you are invited. And if you do, and if you try to bully your way in or work your way in, you can immediately be called out and dragged out and killed. So there's a great fear here for Esther. But she's very smart. She's wise beyond her years, and she figures out, well, I don't have to get invited to have a presence with the king. I can work it so that I invite the king to me. And she could have done that alone, but she also knew that the king was going to need to see that Esther was telling the truth about the claim that she was making. And so she had to invite the persecutor, Haman, into the same meeting with the king. And that takes a lot of courage, too. To confront the person who's been doing the bullying, who's been doing the oppressing, who's been doing the persecuting, and have them in the same room when you're telling a truth, a hard truth. And she does. And she figures out this plan to invite the king and Haman to dinner. And she has this first night, and it's all set up, and she's all ready to go. And she just can't do it. I mean, how many of us have gotten to the precipice of taking that courageous step, that courageous act, and all of a sudden we say, I'm just not ready. Just not ready. So the second night, Esther said, okay, I kind of blew it. This was not working out, so I will try again. And she invites them again. And this time she has worked up the courage to respond the way she was called to respond. And she prepares this huge dinner, and the king sits down and says for the second time, Esther, whatever you want for this gracious act of invitation, whatever you want, even if it's half my kingdom, I will give it to you. And Esther replies in this way. She says, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. I mean, this took a lot of strength and a lot of courage to be able to make what ultimately is an assertion against the king's right-hand man. And she says this with a lot of fear and a lot of trepidation, not knowing what the king's response is going to be. And in that moment, there is grace for that word to be heard by the king. And the king can look over at Haman and say, I see it in your face. I know that what she's saying is true. That what's behind this is your own self-righteous action. And so the king takes that law, takes that decree about annihilating and eliminating the Jews and tears it up and has Mordecai share with the whole kingdom what has just transpired to make sure that everybody knows that this law is no longer in effect. It took one voice to stand up, to not say silent, in order to make a difference. Sadly, as we know, this would not be the only time in human history when the lives of the Jewish people were in jeopardy. And in World War II, at the height of the concentration camps in Germany, a theologian and a pastor named Dietrich Bonhoeffer spoke out to the world to say, it's time for us to have the courage of Esther. It is time for us not just to stand up, but to speak out against the atrocities that are happening. And he said in one of the most famous quotes from Bonhoeffer that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. That is a powerful challenge to each and every one of us. Especially in a day and in a time where there is evil at work in our world. And one of those ways in which we are seeing a return to what Esther and her people experienced as they were being sold into a life of not only servitude, but ultimately into elimination. We have things happening in our country, in our world, that are just as evil. And one of the ones that is coming to a desperate and dire time is this human trafficking. It is now the second highest illegal activity in the world, next to the drug trade. And it is a scary and sobering reality for millions of young people around the world. I'm not going to read each and every one of these statistics, but take a look at those numbers. 27 million people are enslaved in some way, shape, or form around our world, either through indentured servitude, through prostitution. The list goes on and on. But it is an evil in our world. A $32 billion evil, one that has been able to be exploited in many ways because it's something we don't want to talk about. It's something we don't want to admit is going on and happening in our world, but yet it's happening far too frequently in far too many places. And it's not just a problem over there. thousands of miles away or across an ocean. It's here and it's on our doorstep. And sometimes we get very overwhelmed by these issues in our world, and we say, how in the world can we make a difference for those 27 million people, for those 100 to 300,000 children who are sexually exploited in the United States each year? How can we possibly make a difference? It's taking the courage to act. It's taking time to have an Esther moment, to stand up and to speak out and to say, no more. To speak out to the powers that be, to say, we will not allow this to happen on our watch. That takes great courage. And John Wayne once said that courage is really about being scared to death, yet being willing to saddle up anyways. To saddle up and to go forth into the fight that may be uncomfortable, that may be challenging, that may even cause us great fear and risk to our own life. But one voice can make a difference. One voice saying, we need change. For as Bonhoeffer said, to speak or not to speak is an act. To not act is an act. So let us act as God would have us act, to bring about peace and justice and love in our world, rather than destruction and enslavement, pain and suffering. It's time for us to have the courage to speak up and to speak out as followers of Christ. For we have the power in God through Christ. Amen.